out. First, let me say my name is Blanca Winkfield, and I'm the Senior Vice President of Development and Expansion for the Leadership Program. I've been working with them for about 20 years and have been writing grants probably about 15 of those 20 years, and have done tons and tons of rounds of all the rounds of ESD, all the rounds of 21st Century, several other grants, some big federal ones, some smaller foundation grants. And, you know, when we were always doing this process, we always would get other people say, how do you do this? And then we have about, on any given year, over 200 teaching artists who all have their own projects and interests in life. And they would come to me and say, can you show me how to write a grant? And I was like, sure. And so we put together this workshop called Grant Writing 101 to kind of give people who have not the most amount of grant experience a little bit of extra information. So if you've written grants before, you may still find this useful. If you've never written a grant, you will definitely find this useful. Or even if you're in a position where you're supporting people who write grants, where you work in programming, this should be useful to you just to let you know the funding that you're working with, where it comes from, how it gets funded, and how the grant process works, all right? So a little bit of housekeeping. One, this is being recorded. Danny Ortiz up there, she's going to be my right hand today. She's going to be checking the chat box for any comments you guys have, and she'll be recording this process. Now, if everybody could, please type your name in the chat box. This is for attendance purposes. TARC wants us to keep attendance on this. So you'll type your name in at the beginning, and you will also type your name in at the end of the workshop. So if you guys put your name in the chat right now, that'll be very helpful. Thing number 3, please keep yourself muted at all times. I know we're all working, well, lots of us are working from home, and you have other things going on in the background. So if we could do that, that would make the process a lot easier and more streamlined. If you have a question, please feel free to unmute and ask the question. Keep it brief though. There's a lot of information. I want to hear your questions and I want to answer them as thoroughly as possible. So just dive right in. I have no problems with being interrupted. Lastly, there'll be a 2-minute evaluation at the end. So stay tuned for that. That TARC asked us to do for you guys so that we can make sure that we're giving you the best information and that the workshops are relevant and helpful to you guys. Everybody good on that one? All right, and if I ask you a question, you can give me a thumbs up. Thank you, Diana. And just let me know how it's going. Thanks. I like a little bit of participation. I don't want to feel, you know, like I'm out here by myself. I'm going to talk a lot. I'm going to tell you that right now. Danny knows. 2, there's a lot of information on the slides. Do not feel the need to try and rush and write everything down. We will send this PowerPoint to you, okay? So you'll get it. Just jot down notes. As I said, if you have any questions, clarifying questions, please feel free to ask. One thing I'm also going to say is, most of you, how many of you know Extended School Day School Violence Prevention Grant? If you give me a thumbs up, if you know what that grant is. Danny knows, all right. That is a very large funding stream for New York City, right under Extended School Day, right under 21st Century is Extended School Day School Violence Prevention Grant. It's one of the larger funding streams, about $24 million that comes out every 5 years, kind of like 21st Century, that provides after school programming and conflict resolution help in New York State. So I am in the process currently, as we speak, of reviewing those grants. We applied for that grant, and now I'm reviewing those grants. And the way that they work is people from New York City review upstate's grants, and people from upstate read New York City's grants, give us a grade, and then they decide who gets the funding. So I'm in the process of doing that right now. I'm currently reading 16 proposals. So a lot of what I'm going to say today is really targeted on reading those proposals and seeing things that I've had in this workshop as information for a long time, and really focus on the things that I see that people aren't really doing in the, you know, especially in those 16 proposals that I'm reading right now. So you'll get a lot of inside tips. I'll give you that much. So first question people always want to know is, where do I find grants? Now, there's a few really big places. The biggest one is grants.gov. I mean, it sounds so generic. It's kind of like the Amazon of grants. There's everything there. So there's grants from the Department of Justice. There's grants from the Department of Food. Needless to say, the Department of Education. Now, what I'll tell people all the time is go to grants.gov, register there, and they will send you out information on grants that may pertain to you. So you can put in like filters that will tell you, that will say, Are you interested in educational grants? Are you interested in recreational grants? Whatever it is that your organization does, you can kind of filter it down to that by geographic region, by size of grants, any of those things. What I do want to caution people about is don't be so super specific about what you're putting in for. Get more information than you need, because once you cull through that, you never know what kind of proposal may come through you. We actually were included in a Department of Defense grant. Would I have ever looked in the Department of Defense for a grant for us? Never. But they were doing a grant that was specifically about military children who moved around a lot and how they were dissociating themselves from their school community. And so they wanted to find programming that would help those students, which for us, it was very similar to students in temporary housing who moved from school to school to school. And we had done a program like that. They found us, we submitted that to them, and they gave us a grant to do that work. So as I say, always be, try to cast a wide net, but make it kind of specific. But you want to make sure that you're not missing out on any opportunities. The other one is directly the U.S. Department of Education. They have very specific targeted RFPs that come out, and they're not usually appropriate for individual schools or organizations, but you never know. The thing with that one is they may put out an RFP about after school, and it may be for statewide. So you as a CBO can't apply. It may only be for lead educational agencies like school districts, but you know that it's out, which might mean for you, you reach out to your school district and say, hey, this grant just came out from the feds. Are you applying for that? If so, we'd like to be a part of that. So that's another way around eligibility, which we'll talk a little bit more. Your local state education department. So New York State Ed also puts out RFPs. Make sure that you're on their mailing list so that you're getting all the RFPs that they put out, like Extended School Day. Just when it came out, they sent that out to me, said, hey, this is coming out. And normally they give you a couple of weeks ahead of time. So you can start the ball rolling even before the RFP is actually out. Foundation Center is another one. Foundation Center is a huge database for not-for-profits, and it's free. So you can go there, you can take grant writing classes there. They have a list of all the different not-for-profit grants that come out, ones that are eligible, ones that not-for-profits are eligible for. So that's a really good resource, and it's free. Candid.org used to be GuideStar, and now they've changed their name. So basically, that's not necessarily a grant writing entity. What they do is they collect data from all of the foundations that have given out money, like Bill and Melinda Gates. They'll have a section on them and their organization. It will tell you what they gave to, what they've given to, how much money they give out, and what they're focusing on for this year. So it shows you their giving patterns, which is really important, just in case you want to do a foundation grant with them. Make sense? Any questions? So I'm going to ask that at the end of every slide. So if you feel like, you have a question, please hit me with that. Okay. Ooh, super important. How to review an RFP. So who knows exactly what an RFP stands for? Anyone want to unmute? Give it a twirl.
I think I know. Renewal for proposal?
Yes, or request for proposal. Yes.
Oh.
Yeah, so a request for proposal. That means I'm asking you to give me a proposal. So an organization will put out an RFP to people, right? Saying, hey, please send me information. Now, RFPs can be anywhere from 5 pages long. The one I just got through looking at for Extended School Day was 89 pages long. It is a lot, but you need to read every single one of those 89 pages because it will give you all the information that is necessary to figure out if this grant money is right for you and if you're eligible and if you can do it and if you want to do it. So it's very, very important. Some people skim it and that's where they lose. You skim it, you don't read all the parts, it becomes a mess for you. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. So the most important things to look for: deadline, most important. Deadlines are where, how, and when you should deliver the proposal. Super important. If it says 5 p.m., that does not mean 5:01 p.m. They want these things done, and usually they will cut off the portal if it's doing online, if it's an online submission, or if you're mailing it in and they get it after the deadline, they will not include that. Very strict on that. People don't take that seriously enough and don't notice it. Make sure you're looking at Pacific time, Eastern Standard Time, all of those things are very important, especially if you're applying for something that's in another time zone. This is huge. Grantee I can't say this word. I'm so sorry. Eligibility. That's as close as you're going to get from me. Make sure that you are eligible to apply for this grant. They may say this grant is only for organizations that have $1 million in revenue a year. This organization is only for non-faith-based. This grant is only for organizations that work in the 5 boroughs of New York City. And they mean that. You might think, oh, I could squeak it in. I'm right outside, I'm in Yonkers. If they say that's the only people that are eligible are people who are in the 5 boroughs, that's what they mean. So pay attention to that very clearly, or you could end up writing a whole grant, submitting it and not getting it because you weren't even eligible in the first place. Do you need to be registered or certified in any way to apply? If so, how long does that take and how do you do it? Often you may need to have things like a DUNS number, which is an accounting thing. You may have to register with SAM, which is the United States government's database that also gets you paid if you're getting a grant that has anything to do with the US Department of Education. New York State is also requiring people to register with SAM as well. Those registration processes take anywhere from 4 days to a month. It depends on how busy they are. And with COVID, things are taking a little bit longer to process. So if you are not registered with SAM, this grant process, they're giving you from the day that it comes out to 6 weeks is the end of the deadline, and you haven't registered for SAM, and it's going to take you potentially a month to get that information back. That's why you got to start doing that. Go through the RFP and see what those things are and do it immediately so that you don't want to wait to the last minute and go, oh crap, I didn't register for SAM, and you have 2 weeks left and you don't get a response back from SAM, which means you can't apply. So keep those things in mind. Criteria of services. Make sure that you are serving or you're doing things that they ask for, like service area, time of services, number of kids served. In this proposal, they had a minimum of 50 kids. If you're a small organization, you only work with 25 kids at a time, this is not for you, okay? If you only do summer programming and they say this program has to happen all year long, this is not for you. So make sure that you're paying attention to those kinds of things. Program goals and objectives. What's the goal of this? The goal of the grant that I just read, I'm going to keep harping back to that one just because it's fresh in my mind and it's an easy one. The goal is to provide extended school day services and violence prevention. Those are the 2 main goals. That's it. If you do things outside of that, they're not particularly interested in that. Now, you may be able to craft what you do and take that and kind of spin it and make it fit into their goals and objectives. People do that all the time, but just make sure that you're really clear about what it is you do. Like in this one, if you do primarily parent programming, parent engagement, this would not be for you. And it would be really hard for you to spin parent engagement, that's all you do, into extended school day activities and conflict resolution. You could try it. You could say, I'm going to provide conflict resolution services for my parents and teach them about cyberbullying and all these things, which could be part of the school violence prevention program in theory, but you still wouldn't meet their 50 kids served. And there have to be 50 youth served in this thing. So things like that you can try, but you have to figure out what works for you, but make sure that you are in line with whatever they're asking as goals and objectives. How does the funding need to be spent? What are the spending categories? That's another one. If you're an organization that is very top heavy, and you're like, you know what, I'm really, really looking for something to provide some organizational capacity. So I'm looking for a grant that's going to say, we'll help you pay for rent. We'll help you hire these people. We'll help you, do some board stuff. That's a very high administrative cost in those things. So you need to make sure that you can put that in there. This one administrative cap was only like 5%. So very minimal things. You can only put 5% towards rent, 5%, all of that had to be included in that 5%. So you need to make sure that you can spend how within the guidelines of what they're telling you. How much can you apply for per site, per grant overall? That's another big one. So like for this grant, you could only apply for $350,000 per site. That's it. And as an organization, you could only apply for 1.2 million. That means as an organization, I could potentially write, I can write up to $1.2 million worth of grants. So I could write, theoretically, 1.2 million grants for $1 if I wanted to, or 3 grants for 400,000, you know, whatever it is. But you can only write up, well, in this case, it could be 400,000 because the max was 350. So you just have to figure that out and decide how many grants you want to write. If only one, that's fine too. You can write, you know, 1 grant for 350,000. If you want to do more, you can write more grants for different schools or different batches of people that will participate for up to a certain amount of money. But if you know that your program, what you really, really want to do in your heart is $1 million program at one site, then this wouldn't work for you because you could only apply for $350,000 at that one site. Hope that makes sense. How many years is the funding for? That's another one. So how many years is the funding for? Is it for 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 years? This one is for 5 years. So if you have a program that definitely is going to work for 3 years or needs 3 years of funding, then you don't want to apply for something that's a 1-year funding cycle. What percentage of the services must the lead provide? That's another very big one. So if you're an organization like, for example, as I said, if you're an organization that does parent engagement, fine. If you want to add this in here, but you want to bring in other people into your proposal, you can, that do more student-based services, you can bring them in. But usually there's a percentage that they say that the lead organization must provide of services. In this case, the lead organization had to provide at least 30% of the services. So if you're doing 30% in parent work, great. You just need to find that other 70% of work that goes with students can go to someone else. So you need to look at percentages like that. Does that make sense? Because that's one that's sometimes confusing to people. Can I get a thumbs up if that makes sense to you guys? All right. Thanks, man. I'm going to go with it does. All right. So other things to look for. Is there a technical assistance meeting, webinar, and when? So important. Please, 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 please. If they have any kind of technical assistance meeting, that means that they're going to answer questions for you. You read this thing that's 85 pages and you're like, what? You've marked it up. I don't understand what that means. What does that exactly mean? Da, da, da. You can go to this webinar and ask those questions. That's really, really important. You can ask all those questions before you even start writing. So usually there will be some kind of Q&A, webinar, whatever, before, within like the first week or so that the proposal is out. Is there a Q&A portal? So that's the other thing. They will also say, if you have any questions and you can't make the webinar for whatever reason, you can submit questions to a portal. Usually there's a deadline on when that is. And then the most pain in the neck thing is there's a response time after that. So you say, you submit the questions and then they'll say, okay, the questions and answers will be up in 2.5 weeks, which is kind of annoying because if you only have 6 weeks to write and you have a burning question, you do have to wait for those 2.5 weeks, you know, to get the answer back to your question. Now, what I'll say is make sure that you read all the responses. When the Q&As go out, even if you didn't submit a question, read them all because there'll be something in there that you will gain information on that you never even thought about. I have never, ever, ever read a Q&A response and not gotten something for it and not had it help me with my grant. Never. And believe me, they're long. This Q&A had like over 400 questions. Spend the time, read them all, just like reading the RFP thoroughly. It is super helpful. Where do you check for RFP amendments? This is another very big one. We actually had this happen to us this go round. They will give you all the documents. Here you go. Yes. And then they will amend them. They may go, ups, you know what? We gave you this budget. There's one cell in this Excel spreadsheet that we gave you for the budget that doesn't work. Or there's one link in here that we need to look at something and that doesn't work. So they will send out amendments and they will usually send it to the same person who is applying. And they'll say, there's an amendment for this. Sometimes they do, and sometimes they do not tell you that there are amendments. I didn't find out we had a budget amendment. I didn't find out about that amendment until someone else that I knew who was writing told me about it. Because I mean, eventually I would have found it, but I hadn't checked the amendment, you know, I hadn't gone back to the original website to check for amendments. So normally go back to the original website where the RFP lives and check for amendments on a regular basis. They actually had 3 different amendments for this particular grant. So thing is, if there's a new budget template that they put out, you didn't check for amendments, you submit the old budget template, that cannot be counted for you. They will not accept it. So it's very important to make sure you're getting the most updated information. How much is the cost per participant? That's another one. You apply for $350,000. How much does it cost per participant that are they getting for that $350,000? In this case, the cost per participant had to be $1,600. You add everything up, divide the number of kids by the amount you're asking for, it cannot be over $1,600. If you know you have a $2,000 per kid program, this grant would not be for you. And they are very adamant about it. And you also get points normally for how much lower you can go than your cost per participant. I read some grants, they were like $800. They're winning in the budget category versus the proposals that I read that were like $1,600 per participant. So they do look at that very heavily. Are there any priorities? So the priorities meaning age range, school status, MWBE, that's another one. Right now, currently, if you're writing a grant that's for the state or for the federal government, at least 30% of that grant must go to an organization that is MWBE. So that's a big one. So this is where partners come in. If you're an organization that is not an MWBE, you may need to find a partner that is, just so that you can apply for this. As I just said, do you need partners? Do you need an evaluator? You need to meet up with the police department, any of those things, because those are things you need to do like pronto. Does your company need any certification? Do you need to be SAC certified? Do you need social work degrees? Any of those things are super important. If you need to be SAC certified and you're like, yeah, you know what? We're not doing that because that's a lot of work. Then this might not be, then that proposal might not be for you. Budget constraints. As I said, there's usually caps on things. Like this, the evaluation cap on this one was 3%. You can only spend 3% for evaluation. There's a 5% professional development cap. You can only spend 5% on professional development. There's an administrative cap. There's an indirect cost cap. And you need to make sure that when you're doing your budget, you come in at all of those caps. If you're over, that looks very bad for you, or they might not even accept your proposal. Totally depends on who's giving out the funds. Evaluation requirements. Do you have to have an independent evaluator? Yes or no? Do you have to evaluate pre and post? Any of those things. Is evaluation even allowed? Sometimes they're not going to pay for evaluation. You need to make sure that any of those guidelines are being met. Reporting requirements. Do you have to report once a year, twice a year? Do you have to go to a conference to report? These are all things that are very, very important for you to know in the RFP. So I'm kind of done with reviewing of the RFP thing. Any questions on this section? It's a lot of information, I know.
Can you explain the budget act? Oh, I'm sorry, that was tough.
No, go ahead.
Can you just clarify in terms of how you put together a budget for this? So like you would write what you're looking for, and then you would like, I guess, do the lines for like staff, professional development, and they give you a cap. So they're saying you can only spend 5% for PDs, you can only spend 10%, and then that will get you to your cost per participant. Sorry,
exactly.
That was like a lot of information. I was trying to.
So much information. And you'll see my email at the end. So if you want to call me and ask me later, you can. But yes, so with the budget, say for example, you have 300, and I'm going to go through budgets a little bit later too, also. But just a quick answer. You'll have like your staffing. So it's like personnel is the big one. And then outside of personnel, all of those things are things that go into your budget category. And I'm going to talk about, there's a whole slide on budgets coming up. So I'll get more into detail about that. But yeah, that's kind of how it goes. And then usually there may be a couple of different budgets. There may be a composite budget, which is a real quick and dirty budget that has specifically those caps listed out that, and they'll, so you can look at it and you put numbers in, and it goes, oh, we're at 3%, we're at 4%, we're at 5%. That's where the cap's been met. It's a composite budget. Then they have an FS10, which is your big budget, which talks about every single thing. And then there may be a budget narrative, which is the verbal version of your budget. As I said, I'm going to go through that in a little bit.
One more question. Is the DUNS number the same as an EIN number? And then there
definitely
was another,
not.
Okay, what? Can you
Duns is a
clarify?
Duns and Bradstreet number, and it is a number. It's like Duns and Bradstreet is an accounting firm, and it is a certification that you have to. So you're going to have to send in like audits, tax information, all those things to Dun and Bradstreet to get a certification, especially if you plan on getting federal money. You have to have a Duns number, D-U-N-S. And if you just Google it, Duns number, you can go there and it'll tell you all the things that you need to do. I honestly, for everybody that's, if you intend on writing a grant, get a Duns number, register with sam.gov. Do those two things immediately so that when you need it, you're registered, you already have it. Other things to look for writing the proposal. Maximum number of pages, font, spacing, and paper type. Okay, I'm reading 16 proposals right now. And you would think that that is an easy thing. Yeah, I know how many pages it is. I have one proposal that is 17 pages long. The maximum number of pages was 12. So now that person, I, as a reviewer, am instructed to stop reading at page 12. Done. So that means everything that they wrote after page 12, those other 5 pages, they get no credit for. So make sure that you're paying close attention to how many pages there are. Font size. Somebody tried to fudge it. There's a goals and objectives section, which I'll talk about. Goals and objectives. Every goal can only be 1 page in this grant. And it still needs to be, the font size was 12. They did it at a 9.5 font to squeeze everything and get it in on that 1 page. I can't accept that. So their goals and objectives section, which is 10 points, automatically off the top, they're down to a 90. Just because the information is there, and I looked at it, it looks good, they probably would have gotten at least 8 or 9 points, but now they're at a 0 because they didn't pay attention to this. What is included in those maximum number of pages? That's another one. So in this case, it was 12 pages long, but you had to do an abstract. The abstract, which we'll talk about in a minute, the abstract is not included in those 12 pages. So that's another thing. You have to make sure that when you're numbering your pages, if there's an abstract, 9 times out of 10, the abstract is not included. So you would number your abstract, which is at the beginning, with 0. And then start the rest of the numbering after that. So you make sure, because believe me, I have been there where I have included the abstract in my number of pages and freaked out because I'm over, only to realize I'm actually not, because the abstract is not included in page count. So in this case, abstract wasn't included in page count. They asked for an org chart, but that wasn't included in page count. They asked for a budget narrative. That also was not included in the page count. So you need to know what can be included in that maximum number of pages and what is not. It makes a huge difference when you're writing. Order of the content. They're going to tell you how they want this laid out. Follow directions. That's all I'm going to say about that. Is there a scoring rubric? Meaning, how am I grading this? And usually there's a scoring rubric that is included in the RFP. And so it'll say, very good, good, fair, poor, didn't answer. Very good is 5 points. Very good is 5 points, good is 4 points. And it just kind of keeps going and going and going from there, right? And so with that, what you really need to do is figure out, am I giving them what they want? Am I actually on point to get a very good in this section? So you want to grade yourself as you're going along, okay? Because the scoring rubric is what I'm going to use as a grader. How long will it take to receive response? Sometimes they're kind of vague. They may go, you'll know, everybody will be awarded by June or by summer. So you need to know that, because if your program starts June 1 for summer and you're not getting response back till June 5th, this may not work for you. What do you need to include in your submission? So there's a bunch of stuff that you need to include and some stuff you don't need to include. So you need to figure out what's needed. Do you need to include resumes? Do you need to include an org chart? All those things. If you need to include resumes, start gathering. Get them all together. Make sure they're updated. All those kinds of things. Forms to be filled out and turned in. So sometimes there's like a participating schools form. If you're working with a school, then the school may have to fill out something, or a superintendent may have to fill out something. So you need to know what forms need to be filled out and also turned in with the grant. What forms need to be submitted, but not filled out. So there's a bunch of those forms. You may have to send them audit information, tax information, insurance information, depends on what kind of grant it is. So you may have to submit those forms, but they're not anything you have to fill out. You just have to submit them. What items are allowed for inclusion? So with that, I think that's a big one because some people like to say, I'm going to send a video. That's great. Everybody loves a video. Everybody loves to see photos. But if they're not allowed, they will not look at them. And they may disqualify you because you didn't pay attention to that. Can you send examples of your curriculum? Maybe yes, maybe no. But you need to read the RFP and see if that's possible for you. All right. Overall grant writing process. We're going to go through this one kind of quickly. And this is, what are you doing? When you're like, I'm going to write a grant. What does that actually look like? First thing you're going to do, as we just said, read the RFP thoroughly, top to back, make notes. Start any necessary pre-qualification processes. One of the other big ones is most of the time now, you are going to do something online, right? So if you have to do online, that normally means you're going to have to go in and set yourself up, give yourself an account, do a sign in, all of that. This proposal was via SurveyMonkey. I had to go in, register myself independently of the SurveyMonkey that I already have, because it's a different SurveyMonkey login and all of that. So do all of that. So you want to start that ASAP, because sometimes you may realize that it's very difficult and you can't, it takes more work than you thought it was going to take, all those things. So next one is start an upload if possible. So once you figured out, you're like, okay, I have this whole thing that I'm doing. I know that I'm going to be doing it in SurveyMonkey. And sometimes you won't be able to look at the exact questions that are in the grant. That's the first thing you want to know as a writer, like, what are they asking me? What do I have to write? You have to start the upload process first. So get that puppy going. Go in, do your logins, do all that, and then look at all the questions they're going to ask you. Look at what you're supposed to be answering, and then you can kind of move along in that direction. Decide who's leading the team. If you're a band of one, then you're leading the team. Sometimes the person who's leading the team might not actually be the person who's writing the grant. With me, normally I'm writing and I'm doing a lot of stuff, but I also have another person in our office, Tatiana, who's kind of like, the odds, she's kind of like behind the scenes, making sure that all the other parts happen. Because if you're lucky enough to have a grant writing team, then as the grant writer, you should be able to really focus on just writing the proposal, making sure that's very tight. And then you should be able to parse out tasks to other people to help you make that more significant. Pick or recruit partners if needed. So that's, as we talked about before, if you need to, in the example I gave earlier, if you do mostly parent engagement, or you're looking for an MWBE, you want to start picking those people immediately so they can get you their parts and their information for the grant. Define program and meet with the stakeholders to get input. If you're doing something that's at a school, for example, the school is your stakeholder, or a community organization. They're your stakeholders. So you want to meet with them and say, hey, school, I want to write this grant. I want to write you in. What would you like? So start having those conversations immediately. And it's actually even better to start having those conversations as soon as I said, when the RFP comes out, and if you're on any of those listservs or get newsletters, they'll say RFP is coming out in 2 weeks. So as soon as that comes out, before the RFP actually comes out, hit the school up or hit whoever you want to work with up. Then start that process before the RFP even comes out, especially if you're working with the Department of Education. If you're actually, I should say, competing against the Department of Education, because like with Extended School Day, we as an organization, we're competing with the DOE. The DOE will take a bunch of the best schools for a proposal first, and they'll get to them first. So the sooner you get going on this process, the better it is for you. Analyze parts of the grant and make them tasks and assign. Like there's a bunch of different parts, like the budget. Okay, Tatiana does our budgets, or she or another woman in Gindi in our office. So you'll probably see at some point during one of these workshops. They're our budget folks. So I'm like, that's a task. Okay, Gindi, go. Start on the budgets. Danny, who's here, Danny did a lot of like partnership agreements, things like that, like getting those things signed and sent out. Sign that task. Okay, signing it to Danny so that Danny knows what she's going to be doing over the next few weeks. Start compiling information for the proposal and create a system. So you can do it in Google Docs. You can do it on your server, however you want to do it. You just need to make sure that you are creating a very clean, streamlined system, because the last thing you want to do is be in the middle of writing and have to look for a bunch of stuff and don't remember where you put it or couldn't find it. So we do a system of the narrative is here in one folder, budgets in another folder, forms that have to be filled out by people in another folder, partnership agreements, MOUs, which we'll discuss, in another folder. So, and we're making sure that we're keeping everything, data for the needs section in another folder, making sure that everything is really streamlined and that people can get to it when they need it. Then you start writing your drafts. Then you're creating your budgets. Those two kind of go hand in hand. So you do a design of what you want your program to look like. I know it's going to be 3 days after school. There'll be 4 facilitators. We'll do a small summer program. You get all that together as a, and then we're also going to use this other organization who's an MWBE, and they do tutoring. That's kind of your program design. You take that, you figure out how much money that costs. That will help you with your budget scenario. So you start budgets based on those costs, and then you start writing the drafts based on those activities that you're doing. So that's how those kind of link together. Then you meet up with the stakeholders again and the writing team, update and get input. So once you started writing drafts, you got your budget together, you need to check in with everybody again to make sure nothing has changed. And it's really important when you're working with schools, when you're working with other people, to make sure that they can still do what they said they were going to do. Especially with schools, especially working with schools. And as I said, if you're working with the DOE, check back with your schools regularly to make sure that the DOE has not scooped them up and decided to use them in their proposal, because that happens often too. So you want to make sure that you're, or even with principals, sometimes they don't realize, they're like, oh, I can't be in 2 grants. I didn't know that. Another CBO came to me and said they want to be in their grant. So I signed on with them as well. So that's why you want to check back with your stakeholders on a regular basis. Proof all of the grants. So you write them, then you have proofing coming in, and then you copy edit. Proofing is one thing. You're like making sure all the bits and pieces make sense, making sure that it's all in there. Copy editing is something that's very different. Copy editing is, if you indented in this section, is it indented in this section? If you decided to make these words bold all the time, is it still bold in every single section? Readers look for that kind of thing. Final drafts and budgets created, and then get all necessary sign-offs. And the sign-offs, unfortunately, usually happen at the end, because oftentimes schools, principals, superintendents, other people that you may have to work with, other partners, may want to know that the whole thing is finished, and they may say they want to read it before they sign off on it. And so superintendents say that all the time, well, send us a proposal and we want to read it. They don't really read it. Like, they don't. They just want to skim through it, make sure that they're not signing their name to anything that seems impossible or crazy, or, you know, because they do have to put their name to it. So that's an important one. And then copy and deliver, upload the proposal. Done and done. Any questions about the process? Cool. So these are the parts of the grant, okay? So this is the biggest thing, I think, looking at all the individual parts of a proposal. Every grant is going to be different. If you're doing something that is a federal grant versus a state grant versus a foundation grant, they may look different, but in general, the parts that will have to go into any proposal are the ones that we're going to talk about. Are there other parts that maybe ask? Sure, but these are the basics. If you get these down, you're pretty good to go. Number 1, executive summary or the abstract. And I mentioned this before. So this is a simple thing. Executive summary is just a 1-page overview of what the whole proposal is going to look like. So literally, particularly if you're writing something for a foundation, what they'll do is they'll take that 1 page, rip it off the top, and they'll just read that. And they may decide just from that 1-page abstract whether they're even going to bother reading the rest. With a lot of foundation grants, they'll ask you to submit a 1-page abstract. They'll read that. That's all they want you to submit initially, 1 or 1 to 3 pages. And then they will just make a decision on the basis of all the abstracts they get, whether they want you to submit a full proposal. So they may get 100 abstracts. They'll read them and they're like, out of those 100, this 20, hey, you 20, give us a full proposal. So that's how a lot of foundations work. But in general, abstract is at the beginning. It's 1 page. It should include your project name, description, who it is. So it's like the leadership program in coordination or in collaboration with New York City Department of Education, District 25 presents this, blah, 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 blah. We will work with 150 students during the school day, providing academic enrichment, after school, providing dance, drama, and so. We will also work with our partner, Homework Happy People, to provide homework help. You know, it lists all those things. We will have an evaluator. And then usually in there, you also want to put a description of the community. So we will be working in 4 Title I schools with low ELA scores and a community that's seen its share of violence due to the uptick in gangs. I'm making all this up, but that's the kind of stuff you want to put in there. So it's going to have a summary of your project goals, your methodology, your evaluation, any partners, and then structure and timeline, and sometimes cost. So it's like, this program will operate for 30 weeks during the school year and will cost $200,000. Okay, so that's kind of all you want to put in there. So you want to be able to like look at this one page and say, oh, I know who this company is. I understand why they need this money, or this community needs this money. They understand who the partners are. They understand what the program design looks like. They understand how long it's going to be, how much it's going to cost. All that should be in one page. It is very hard to put all that in one page, but same thing with the abstract. If it's over one page, we can't read it. But in this case, the abstract, A, didn't count for any points, and 2, didn't count towards the page number. So tips on this one: create a checklist and keep track of the inclusion. So if they say in the abstract they want all these things, make sure you like got that, did that. Yep, timeline's in there, cost is in there. Oh, evaluator, that's in there. And then get to the point. Quick, quick, quick. You don't want to be too verbose in your abstract because you don't have a lot of space. Now, another thing about abstracts, if you read carefully the RFP and the scoring rubric, and it says abstract is 0 points, needless to say, you want to do a good job at all of it, but if you're crunched for time, the abstract doesn't need to be magical or amazing because it doesn't give you any points in the end. In the end, you always want to go for the big points. But I find the abstract is very good for me because it's like a guide. So I'm like, I get to look at my abstract and go, oh yeah, I made sure I included everybody. Yep, go back to, refer back to the abstract, make sure everything I'm writing is included in that. Needs. This section is huge. The needs section says why you need this money, why you need this money, why this school needs this money, why this community needs this money. So this is the section, there's not going to be one grant, not one. That's not going to require you to state your need, period. So however you do it, or whatever it looks like, this is super important and usually has a nice amount of points associated with it. And so when I keep talking about points, as I said, the scoring rubric will tell you exactly each section, how many points it's worth. And usually it might be one big section is worth this amount. And then there may be individual questions under that. So like for the needs section, in this case, for example, the grant that I just wrote, the needs section in total was, I think, 20 points. And then, no, 15 points. And they had 3 sections under it. Each of those were worth 5 points maximum. You can get 15 points total for your needs. The first question was, tell us about the community that this is in. So that was a question. So with that, they want to know the community, gangs, drugs, anything like that. Let me be clear. The thing about the needs section is, and a lot of us work in some of the most underserved communities. And so this is one of those times where you want to highlight those needs. You want to say exactly what's happening in this. It may not be pretty, it may not be nice, but this is where you want to really put it all out there and, really make sure that they understand why this money is needed. So you want to talk about this community has this level of poverty. This community used to have, like I read one grant from upstate, and they did a really good job telling the story of this community used to have one big, huge factory that closed down 2 years ago. And now with COVID, the unemployment rate has skyrocketed to like 60%. So that's a story you can back up with facts and numbers and know. And I got a feeling about why this community needs this extended school day program. So you want to make sure that you're putting your things out there. So you want a description of the current issue, like what's going on in that neighborhood that they need this. There's a high level of unemployment. There's a high level of opioid abuse. There's a high level of, gang violence, all those things. Those are, some of the big needs in that community. A description of the desired outcome. What do you want it to look like on the other end? So usually they will ask you something about like, why is your organization the organization to make this happen? Or what will happen on the other end? How's this need going to be fulfilled? And you want to, kind of describe the barriers between the current state and the ideal state. Current state is these kids in this community read below grade average. Ideally, we would like to bring them up, in grade. So, you want to balance that if that's a part of the question. And then describe the need and the demand. So not only is there a need, but parents also are demanding this. So when you're doing a need section, you want to really make sure you're kind of hitting all these buckets, but you also want to make sure you're answering the question. So as I said, the 3 questions in this proposal were community need, describe the community and what's going on in that need. And that's literally community at large. The second one was to describe the specific student population. So these specific kids at this school or at this site or in this neighborhood. So that's their ELA scores, that's their report cards, that's anything specifically, like if you're working with a school and you have an anecdote from a principal, like we had one that they just right at the, before COVID ended, they had a girl fight of 13 girls, in the middle of the hallway. So things like that are the things you're gonna put in there. So that's like specific to kids. The third question was, describe the actual needs. So you would say, based on these things that I just told you in these last 2 questions, we have a need for violence prevention program to stop, violence in the schools and outside of the schools. We have a need for academic enrichment because these ELA scores are low with these kids. We have a need for a place for kids to go to be safe for the working parents in this community. So those would be like 3 big overarching needs. And then you write the needs section out to support those. So you're always going to write anything to support whatever you're claiming your need is. So you're talking about school report cards, you're talking about police stats, all of those things, because you have to put citations in for each of those things. You cannot simply say, this neighborhood is really bad, there's a lot of gangs here, and there's a shooting every week. That means nothing. There's no citation on that. There's no as according to, like, you need to say, according to the New York City Police Department's Comcast Crime Stop app, there has been an uptick in violence by 20% since blah, blah, blah. That's a citation. And how you do your citations is totally up to you. But everything that you say, that's data or information in the needs section, needs to be cited. Endnote, footnote, included in the body of the verbiage, doesn't matter, totally your call. That's another thing you need to look for to see if, because for this grant, endnotes, which can be a whole page, endnotes were not included in the final page count. So that was information that I did not get until the Q&A came out. That's why the Q&A is important. So I was like, how should we do this? Like, should we include footnotes or endnotes? I don't know. I had to wait for that 2 weeks to get the information to find out that endnotes were not included and in the final page count, but we can include them as an attachment, which saved me in writing. So now I get to write my 12 pages and I don't have to shrink my 12 pages to 11 to account for the footnote. Does that all make sense? Yeah, still with me? As I said, it's a lot. And yeah, feel free to, unmute yourself if you have a question, because there's a lot. One of the other things I'm going to say, tips, use formatting effectively, bullets, charts, etc., if allowed. Now, this one, another one, charts were not allowed in any part of the proposal. Sometimes charts are allowed in the needs section, but it was not allowed. And I did have I had 2 proposals. One proposal that used a chart in the needs section. I'm not allowed to include that information. So that weakened their proposal because I couldn't look at any of the data in that chart. Done. And that's where they put all the kids' test scores, ELA scores, all of that. They got no points for any of that. So theoretically, I have no idea what those kids need because they didn't supply any information that was usable to me as a reviewer because it was in a chart. All right. Program narrative. This section is you telling how. How are you going to do all the things? In the needs section, I just listed out 3 needs. How are you going to combat those needs? How are you going to make sure that those needs are being taken care of? The program narrative is really where you tell a story. It is a narrative, but do not make it too anecdotal, but make sure that you're, telling a story. I want to know, I want to feel what your program looks like from day one. I want to be able to read this section and then say, oh, got it. Now, in the narrative, there will probably be tons of little questions under that. So it's like program narrative or project work plan or program description. It may be called any of those things, but then they may say, here's 7 questions that you need to answer to get me to this overall narrative. So 1, create a strong goals and objectives section. There's always goals and objectives in this section. Sometimes it is included as a special attachment, which we're going to talk about because in this case it was, or sometimes you just write them in the grant. But a lot of times nowadays, they're a whole separate table. They kind of are, in a chart table form. Other thing you want to do is clearly outline methodology, activities, numbers of student, recruitment plan, stakeholder involvement, all of that. So when you're telling this story, there's 2 ways it can be done. Normally, if you're doing a foundation grant, they may just say, provide me with a project description. And then you just get to write everything you want about your project. Make sure you're including all those things in bullet 2. Done. Other grants, a lot of definitely federal grants or state funded grants, they're going to ask you a bunch of questions that will get you to answering all those things. Like they may ask you for specifically, what is your recruitment and retention plan? And then you have to write what that looks like. How are you going to take attendance? Write what that looks like. How are students going to travel safely to and from the after school program? Write that out. How are families and school administration going to be involved on an ongoing basis in this program? Write that out. Basic overall, describe your program and its methodology. That's where you're like, based on Castle's, socio-emotional learning, we have decided to do this extended school day program that provides 250 kids with 5 days of after school from the hours of 2:30 to 5:30. They will have homework help. They will have snack. The homework help will be done by certified teachers. They will have dance and drama, which will be done by our partner, the leadership program. They will also have robotics done by our partner, Vision Education. You put all that in there, and this program has been built on this methodology, blah, 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 whatever your methodology is. We have seen that this has worked previously because of this data. Give a little bit of data and backup on why you're using this model and why you think this model is going to work for you. So all of that goes in there. All of that is it. Define timeline and your evaluation plan. This program will be evaluated at the beginning of the program and at the end of the program. The expected outcomes of this program are all of this. That's what that section should look like. So tips on that: mirror the funder's goals and questions. So if their goal, if they talk about our goal for this or our mission for this is to bolster kids who know how to paint, if that's their goal, then you want to say that all the time. You want to say, and helping kids paint is this program, or we do this because it helps kids paint. You want to use their language over and over again. So as a reviewer, you see that because that's going to be in the scoring rubric, and you're like, oh, yep, they've met that. They keep saying that. Use SMART goals. Whenever you're doing goals and objectives, you definitely want to use SMART goals. It needs to be measurable, realistic, timely. Realistic is the biggest thing. Like when you're doing goals and objectives, which we'll talk about in a little bit, you just want to make them real. You don't want to say, if you're a soccer program, but it's important, these kids have low ELA scores at the school. You don't want to say, we're going to increase all ELA scores by 25% by kids playing soccer. Totally not realistic. But you may, figure out a way to put some of that in there, but you want to make sure that they're very realistic and you can actually do them. Promote accountability and give your rationale for doing this way. So that's when I talk about methodologies. Like, we're doing this program because we've seen it work at this school. Or if it's never been done before, we're doing this program because Castle says programs like this do this. Or the Search Institute for 40 Youth Development Assets says programs like this do this. So if it's something you've never done before, or if you personally don't have a lot of evaluation information about your programming yet, then you want to make sure that you put in there research and data that cites and talks about programs like yours and how effective they are and how they make those outcomes happen. Because that's something that they're also going to be looking for. Personnel, project management, this just tells the who's doing it. In this proposal, there was a whole staffing and management section, which was worth, I think, 15 points as well. And so the first one is describe all full-time and part-time positions pertaining to this proposal. And that's where you're like, there'll be a project director. Her name is Monica Smith. She's been a project director for 20 years and has worked on grants like this, for the last 10 years and manages budgets of, $10 million and more. The program coordinator is going to be this person, Danny Ortiz, and Danny has worked in schools, The financial person is going to be Michael Jones. He's a CPA and he's, worked on budgets up to $50 million. And then you want to talk about what they're specifically going to do in this. Michael Jones, the financial guy, he will be in charge of tracking expenses, payroll, blah, 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 blah. So you want to make sure that when they're asking what the people are doing in this, you have the people and then you have what they're doing, and it's very clear. They want to know exactly who's doing what, how much experience they have, because they want to know, why am I giving Danny Ortiz this money? Like, has Danny ever worked on a program this big before? Has she, does she have experience? Am I going to give her this $350,000 and she's going to know what to do with it? You're convincing them that they know what to do with it. And then you have the staffing to be able to make this program implementation possible. So in that, you want to have your organization, the name, the type of organization, location, its mission, if there's space for all of that, history, milestones, and effectiveness. Like, leadership program, we just got a Castle designation, which is huge. So we're like, leadership program, a Castle designated, blah, blah, blah. This is where you get to kind of toot your own horn as an organization. Vision education, #1 in robotics, as rated by so-and-so. These are the kind of things you want to put in there so that you're letting them know we can do this work. We've done it before and we're good at it. Funding and service awards, press, media, any of those things that you want to throw in. You do not want to write a whole press release on yourself. That's not what this is for. But you want to make sure that you're putting in there information that gives them the idea that you can make this happen. Current services, work and products. That means, like, if this program is about dance, you can say, we're currently serving, 75 schools in New York City with dance programs that have been renewed annually for over 10 years. That kind of thing. You want to let them know we're doing this already and we've been doing it and we will continue to do it. So the other thing you want to do is, you want to build credibility. You want to make sure that they feel like you're a credible organization, that you can do this work. And you want to cater to the reader. You want to make sure that the person who's reviewing it understands who you are, feels it. As I said, there were a few things I got to give them credit. Boys and Girls Club, they do this amazingly. And probably because they're huge. So they have stories. They're like, we've been around for 150 years. We've run this program. So you're like, yeah, you get the points on that, because I know that you can do this program theoretically. It's highly vetted. They actually have their own methodology that they use. So it ticks all the boxes as pertaining to their organization that can actually do this. Show historical perspective, as I said, and toot your own horn. Okay, evaluation. I'm going to really skip through this one because it's very, it's important, but not major. Evaluation tells how you're going to do this, and it may not even be included in all of the proposals that you do. It may not actually say you can include evaluation, but if they do, you want to make sure that you have chosen an evaluator that you can work with, one, and that they're going to be able to help you in some kind of ways. So find an evaluator that will write their own section. If there's a huge evaluation section in there, only partner with an evaluator who will write that section for you, because 9 times out of 10, you don't know exactly how to do a quasi-experimental pre and post evaluation survey. I know I do. Or how to analyze it. So you want to be able to have them write that section, put in all their jargon, all the stuff that they need, but then also make sure that it's not just all jargon, all chalk talk. Make sure that it blends well with the goals and objectives. So you want to also make sure that your evaluator can assist in doing some of the other project portions, like your goals and objectives, program design, all those things, because an evaluator should be able to say, the dosage on that is not enough. We're not going to get the results that we want from this program if these kids are only coming 1 day a week. We might need to see if we can make this program happen 2 days a week. So you want to get them involved on that level. And a good evaluation plan should mirror the program narrative. So you want to make sure that they're similar. You want to make sure that your program narrative, anything that they say in the evaluation section, is also being said in the program narrative. We're going to meet 3 times a year to evaluate the program. You say that in the narrative, the evaluator needs to say that as well. Make sure that the evaluation cost is in line with the CAP. As I said, make sure it's not all jargon and that a lay person who's reading it can understand it. And make sure they're familiar with New York Department of Education evaluation tools and protocols. So you want to make sure that when you're writing it pertaining to whoever is reading the proposal. Budget. Now this is getting back to your question, Diana. This is a key component. It tells the funders how you're going to spend their money and exactly how this relates to the need. One thing that I can't stress enough is when you're doing budgets, and particularly if you're doing a budget narrative, you want to make sure that every cost in there is linked back to what you said you were going to do. In the narrative, 5 days a week, 2 hours a day, dance. Then they need to see all the different categories that go under that to make that happen. So number 1, gather personnel costs. You as an organization, if there's only you in this proposal, that's easy enough. How much does it cost for you to run a program that's 5 days a week? How many people are doing that? How many? So you get all that information, you put that into the budget. OTPS, other than personnel services. That's anything like travel, supplies. How much are you going to need in supplies? Is this a coding program? If it's a coding program, then you might need to buy laptops for the kids, or you may need to buy some outside curriculum. Travel, do the kids have to travel back and forth for this program? Those are all the things you need to put in there, and that comes in the line item of OTPS, other than personnel services. Personnel services are normally going to be your largest cost, right? So you have that, and then you also may have another category in there if you're working with somebody outside of your organization. That's services, so direct services. So if you're doing this thing, but you're bringing in, I keep using Vision Ed because they just popped in my head, Vision Ed for robotics, then they're going to be all their costs. They're going to give you a lump sum for their costs. Vision Ed is going to charge you $50,000. You don't have to break down their budget. It's just $50,000 for Vision Ed that's going to go in there under vendor services. And then you might have teachers working after school. That's going to be another line item, So it depends on how you want to set up your budget, but you need to know the major things: personnel, OTPS, indirect cost. Indirect cost is all the overhead. So how much can I charge overhead? You have to have a plate, you have to have rent, you have to have phone, you have to have internet, you have to have all these things. Those are things that impact programming, but are not direct student services. So it's not directly me putting somebody in front of a kid to do work. So anything that is outside of that, but that you need to run your business, is an indirect cost. And so usually there's a cap on how much they're willing to contribute to that. So in this case, it was 5%. So you can chalk up 5% of your rent, 5% of your internet, 5% of your, maybe even somebody who's writing curriculum for you, 5% of their cost. You need to look at, but all of that is very specific to each individual grant. So when you get the RFP, that's when you need to look through and see what they will allow you to include in your indirect cost. Okay, that's very important. That makes sense to you, Diana? You get that? I hope so. Okay. So tips. Be accurate and make sure you're being really competitive, as I mentioned before, with the cost per student rate. That's the thing that was really, really particular in this one. You could only have up to $1,600. So make sure you're being competitive, because most of the proposals that I read were around $1,400. So if I'm reading 16 and they're around 14, 13, the one that's at 16 seems really high to me. And the one that's at 8 seems really low. So you need to, you want to make sure that you're being competitive in this thing. but you also don't want to undercut your cost. Make sure that you're, putting every cost in that you need. And make sure that you have all funds categorized exactly how the funder asked. Do not try to put things in here that they say you can't, and do not try to categorize them in a different way. One thing that they would not pay for in this was uniforms of any sort. And somebody tried to put that in there. And you can't put that in as a budget cost because they already told you can't do that. All right, goals and objectives. This is huge. The goals and objectives section is, I think, what people get because it's not something that they normally do. I think it's something that they have a really hard time with. And as I said, if you can get your evaluator, if you have an evaluator, if you have to use one to help you with this, it's easy. But if not, it takes a minute to figure out. So your goals and objectives, usually it's a table. And so there'll need to be a goal statement at the top. And that goal statement can literally be your goals for this proposal. As I said, you need to have like basic needs that you got from all the needs section for your school. And then you have goals for this grant. What are the goals? What is it that I'm saying that I'm going to do? So like goal number 1 might be provide students at, this school activities to increase ELA scores. That's the goal. Done and done. So you need to be able to link that to need. And sometimes they have need as a part in the table, and sometimes they have it as part of the goal statement. So wherever it lives, you need to be able to answer that. So linking it back to the need, it will be students at this school need to improve ELA scores because only 15% are reading at grade level. So that would be the need for that particular goal, need supporting that particular goal. Then you have a measurable objective. That's like anything, just an objective. My objective in this workshop that I'm doing right now is to have participants understand the basics of writing a grant. That's my objective, right? A measurable objective means that 75% of people participating in this workshop will increase their knowledge about writing grants. Done by 20%. That's my measurable objective. Program activities and staff responsible would be Blanca Winkfield, Senior Vice President of the Leadership Program, will provide a 1.5 hour long workshop on grant writing. Done. That's the activity. That's the staff responsible. Timeline. April, don't even know the date, sorry. April, whatever, 2021. Or you could say spring of 2021. And then performance indicators, which performance indicators are how you evaluate, how am I saying that this actually happened? How am I indicating that this, what I wanted, my measurable objective actually happened? That will be, I'd say, at least 75% of participants in the workshop scored the presentation good or very good in post-evaluation surveys. Now that's really, do you understand how this kind of aligns together? So you're giving a goal. What's your goal in this thing? What's your goal from jump? What is the need that you're linking it to on the other end, right? The need that we talked about in the needs section. What is your measurable objective? What's the percentage of people that are going to be measured, how many people? And you never want to say 100%. Totally unrealistic. You want to stick to the 75s, 80s, 90s, depending. If you're asking about attendance, then you want to say like 90%. But if it's somebody learning something, going higher than 80%, you're shooting yourself in the foot, especially if it's actually going to be evaluated on the other end. And then activities, when they ask for activities, it is literally the thing that they are doing physically that's going to make this impact. And then timeline is exactly the timeline. So for programming, after school program, you may say from September to June annually. That's the beginning and the end. And then performance indicators, as I said, performance indicators are the thing that you're looking for to measure, and then how you're going to measure it. So the thing that you're looking to get a grade on is at least 70% of these people will say this was a good workshop. How am I telling that? How am I getting that information? As noted by the post survey. So that's a very important thing. People usually leave out the how do I get to know this information. Like if you're talking about raising ELA scores, the how is as reported by New York City Department of Education report cards, as reported by New York State standardized ELA tests. So you'll say these kids are going to go up by 3%, and it's as noted by those things. So as I said, that's, and goals and objectives are usually a very big part. So you want to make sure that you're getting all that where it needs to go. Overview of grant, organizational overview. These are other sections that may be in a grant, maybe not. Organizational overview, that's an even bigger overview of your company, where they want you to go into deep dive specifics about your company. How many years you've been in business, how many people you have working for you, what's your annual revenue, all those kinds of things. Programmatic implementation timeline, that may be another whole section that they ask. They want to know specifically, start to end, what's your timeline, what's happening every single month in your programming. Leverage resources, another big one. Leverage resources is where you say, like in New York City, one of our great leverage resources is that normally our New York City kids get Metro cards. So you can say, we're going to use, we're not going to charge you grant people this amount of money for travel because New York City kids already have a Metro card. We're going to use that as a leverage resources. That's a perk for us. Whereas upstate, every upstate grant that I've just been reading, they have to put in a large sum of money for buses for students to travel. So in theory, New York City proposals look a little bit better than upstate proposals because they have that leverage resource. And the other things can be leverage resource. Like if you have a coding program, and in that coding program, you already got a Microsoft grant that gives you free laptops, that's a leverage resource. You're saying, I'm not going to charge you in my supply line for this grant for laptops because Microsoft already footed that bill. Sustainability statement, that's becoming more and more popular. That's a section that says, once this money runs out, how are you going to sustain yourself after this? What are you doing right now to make sure that this program still keeps going? They don't want to just give you money and then like, oh, at the end of 5 years, you come, with your hat in your hand begging again. You have to make sure that you're figuring out some way to sustain this program. What you can do to get a better score. Attend any information sessions offered, which is what I mentioned before. That's huge. Make sure you ask questions and read the answer post. Talked about that already. Get a scoring rubric. Now, here's the thing. You remember this old SAT trick. You have all this stuff on the SATs, all the big questions, big money questions. Go for those first. Spend the most amount of time answering the questions that have the biggest point value. Because, especially if you're new to this, you may run to the deadline. You're like, oh crap, I still have to answer all these questions. Make sure the ones that have the highest point value are super tight. The other questions, like there was one question I remember, like when I first started writing grants, there was one question about, I think it was actually about attendance. And we were waiting for the DO because we were collaborating with the DOE and we're waiting for them to get back to us on like how they wanted to do it. And, I was like, you know what? I'm going to write 2 sentences and be done with the whole thing. It's not even going to be, but it was only a 1-point question. So I wasn't going to sit and take away time from me focusing on the questions that were like 8 or 9 points to focus on this 1-point question. So make sure you're answering the big points first. Get a copy of previous grants. You can request previous grants from other people. There's Freedom of Information Act. Sometimes you can go directly to the funder and ask for previous grants, just so you can see what other people wrote, how they answered those questions. 9 times out of 10, from round of funding to round of funding, the requirements don't change that much. Or the questions they're asking don't change that much. Stick to any templates given, especially the budget. If they give you a budget, stick to that budget template. Do not go outside of that. Create your budget in Excel, then import the numbers into the template. That is really, really big. You want to make sure that you're staying true to what they're asking you. So if they're asking you about this category, keep true to that. Put it in Excel. That way you can make all the mistakes you want, make sure your math is all good, and then import it into whatever budget template they give you. If the proposal asks questions, start with your answer and then answer the question. Start with the question and then put your answer in there. I, as a reviewer, and I see it even more now. I really appreciate having the defined question at the top and then an answer. Some people like to do a true narrative where they're just like, I'm going to write everything. I want to answer all the questions however I feel like it and put it into like a story. And you can totally do that. But what it does is now it makes the reviewer have to nitpick and go backwards and forwards in your narrative to figure out where you answered that question or if you answered it thoroughly enough. So if you just like, if they ask you, how do you cross the street? Answer that there. Do you like crossing the street? Answer that there. You don't want to write, I like crossing the street. And normally I do it like this. That's, you know, mushing two questions into one answer. So you really want to stick with that. And as I said, I'm a very big fan of starting your answer with the question. Set a firm timeline to work on the proposal. Make sure that you have a designated timeline and that you can stick to that. So every day I would say, okay, I'm going to work on this proposal for 4 hours and I'm going to switch to this proposal because you can run out of time. Have your proposal read by at least 3 people for content. That is insanely huge. You want to make sure that other people are reading it and not just you. As I gotta say, give Danny credit. Danny read our proposals. Danny was not involved in the writing process, but she read them and she found some important things that because you've been living with this for 6 weeks and you've been writing for 6 weeks, you forget. You're like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense to me. And Danny was like, that's not in there, or that doesn't make sense, or I found this mistake. So it's very important to get somebody who has not been living with a grant for a long time to read it and make sure that it makes sense to them. And have your proposal edited by at least 2 people. That's another big one. Make sure that somebody else is editing it. Quickly gonna run through these. Common mistakes, wrong font, too many pages. We discussed that earlier. Charts and graph in the wrong section or not at all. Budget errors or budget program and budget narrative do not match. I didn't really talk about the budget narrative. The budget narrative is when you take your actual budget, which is all numbers, and you translate that into a story or words. And you say, this program is asking for $50,000 for personnel costs. Those personnel costs will be 3 trainers, 3 people doing after-school programs for 2 days a week, for 30 weeks. They will teach dance, drama, and so to increase the social-emotional learning of students. That's how you're spending that $50,000. That's a narrative. They can look at the budget and see, because the budget's going to say, staff, $50,000. Done. The narrative tells the story of how that $50,000 is being spent and what you're going to get with that $50,000. So that's the budget narrative. So you want to make sure if you have a narrative that it matches all the categories that you have in your budget. Too many stories and not enough facts in the needs section. We work in some underserved schools. We can tell sad stories all day long. But if it's just a story and there's no actual facts or data that comes with a citation to go along with it, it's just your opinion, really. It's not actual fact. It becomes just your opinion. And so that will weaken your needs section. Methodology and needs section not cited. As I said, again, if they ask you for a methodology, you need to make sure that those citations are there as well. You didn't answer every question. Some people are like, oh, well, that question doesn't pertain to me. Like there was one question about buying equipment through this thing. And that was a 2-point question. I can't just not answer it, even though I'm not buying equipment. My statement has to be, through this proposal, we will not be purchasing any equipment, period. So if there's a question, make sure you answer it in some way, shape, or form. Do not say NA or anything like that. Just use a sentence and do it to the best of your ability. Too little detail. You don't want to say, we're going to have after school program that's going to run for 30 weeks and kids will get better. And that's generic. What do those 30 weeks look like? Give me a breakdown. As I said, I want to be able to visualize that. Bad goals and objectives section, or the goals and objectives don't match the program description. Any of those things. You want to make sure that you are really paying attention to your goals and objectives and that they mirror the language, mirror the activities, and mirror the needs totally. Creating a grant writing template. This is an easy one. You just want to make sure that these are things that you can do ahead of the time frame. 1, get all your program information together. And so when we talk about creating a grant writing template, that means right now, when there's no grant happening in your life, it's great to start gathering stuff. So when a grant comes out, you will have time to be able to do that. So that's gathering all your program information, like your DUNS, your EIN, your DBN, all those things, common budgets, that kind of stuff. Create a basic program design. Know what your program design is going to look like. So you can start doing that ahead of time. Oh, I'm going to look for money next year for this program, but I want the program to look exactly like this. And these are the partners that I want in it. Let me reach out to them ahead of time. Get them on board. Start doing all that stuff early. Needs. If you know you only work in Brownsville, Brooklyn, gather all the needs information about that neighborhood first. So when you have to write a needs section later, you're not running around looking for stuff. Evaluation data. So you want to make sure that your evaluation data is on point. Now, one of the, excuse me, I have to get my charger. One of the things about evaluation that I think is super important is that people don't do it enough. Like if you're a small organization, you don't have any evaluation data, it's becoming more and more important of a thing that you have something. So you need to start working on that now ahead of time. I say, like, just start gathering evaluations, hire somebody, a firm or something, or even do a small pre and post yourself, because evaluation data is becoming a thing. If you don't have it in the future, you won't actually even be able to apply for stuff. Resumes, that's another big one. Get your resumes together. Get them all in one place. Danny knows that was a mad dash at the end for us. Like, get all the resumes, because you want to have resumes for every position that you talk about. So if they ask you who are the full-time and part-time people, you put those names in there. You need to have their most updated resumes. And sometimes, like, oh, I haven't updated my resume in 10 years. Oh crap, So you want to make sure that all of that's happening. All right. Anybody got any questions? So much information.
This was definitely a lot of information, but so helpful. I really appreciate the thorough run through of all of the details that go into putting together a grant. And it's just so interesting that what you really have to do is just follow directions. That's like the key.
Yeah, and it seems really simple, but it's because there's so many directions, it's a lot. And as I said, like this workshop really is like a half-day workshop. Like when I've done this thoroughly, it's 4 hours to go into each and every single individual part and component and really tease it all out and explain it. But as I said, this is my email address. If you need anything, let me know. If you want to reach out to me, please feel free to reach out and say, hey, I'm writing a grant. Do you have any info on this? Sorry, I was trying to do the thing that I don't know how to do it, Danny.
No worries. I just put the evaluation link in the chat, and
You're the best.
Remind everyone, like right before you log off, just put your name and your CBO one more time in the chat for attendance, and then any questions.
Yes. So yes, please do that. Please put your name and your CBO in the chat box again for attendance for talk, so they'll know that you were here. And as I said, feel free to email me if you have questions or looking for a partner to write grants with. We're always here. We do lots of stuff. We write grants. So we'd love to partner with you guys in any way, shape, or form that we can and keep you abreast of things that are happening with us. And also, please make sure that you fill out the evaluation that's in the chat box. And I think that's it for today. Thank you guys for attending so much. We're right pretty much on time.